So this is episode 1. I'm going to cut it into 2 bits, part A and part B. Part A is what happened that fateful day, and part B, as I've mentioned before, is what happened the days, weeks, months and years afterwards, and of course, what happened to Jim and Nancy Beaumont. Well, as I said, on January 26, 1966, it was a Wednesday, and the following Monday was back at school for Jane and Arrna. Jane was going into grade 5, Arrna into grade 4. Now they only had a few days left of their summer holidays, and they were very excited to fit in as much fun as possible. The kids wanted to head back down to Colley Reserve, which they did plenty of times previously. Now, Grant, 4 years old, and Arrna, 7 years old at that time, raced into their parents' bedroom and started jumping up and down on the bed. They want to go to the beach, they want to go to the beach. Now, if you have children and you want to sleep in, that's not going to happen, and it never happened to Nancy. The children were very excited, but where's Jane? Well, she was in the other bedroom, and she was most probably, I've heard this by Jane's best friend Jenny, that she was most probably reading her paperback Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Even though they wanted to go to the beach, Mrs. Beaumont, or Nancy Beaumont, knew it was going to be a scorcher that day. Now, around the kitchen table, Jane joined in, and that's when Arrna and Grant were teasing Jane. Jane's got a boyfriend, Jane's got a boyfriend, which she meant at the beach. However, this is just kid talk, so Nancy didn't take too much notice of it. Now, she could let the children go to the beach, or she could have them scurrying around her feet while she was doing housework. She didn't want that to happen, so she relented. You can go down the beach for a few hours and be back by lunchtime. You can go in around 9:30, 10 and get the 12 o'clock bus back. Why is that? Because she knew, as I said, it was going to be a scorcher or a stinker in Adelaide that day, around 42, 43 degrees Celsius. Now, in Adelaide, what is a scorcher? Well, I can tell you from experience because I was born there, and what my brothers and sisters put up with was those hot, dry Adelaide summers. Now, I am not completely sure, but I have heard that South Australia is the driest state in the driest continent in the world. Now, if you have a look at an aerial photo of South Australia, you can see it's just fringed slightly with green. The rest is desert. Now, when those hot, dry, northerly winds blow down from the deserts, it hits Adelaide and the surrounding suburbs like an absolute blast furnace. Now, as children, like the Beaumont children, in these sorts of days you had 2 options really. You would head to the beaches. With the Mullins family, it was Seacliff and Brighton. Brighton was my favourite because you could jump off the jetty, and a lot of teenagers went there. Or you could head further to Colley Reserve, Glenelg, with this vast green lawn. It was like a bowling green carpet of lawn. It was absolutely beautiful. Or you could head to the Adelaide Hills. Now, behind Sequin Gardens where I lived, there was the Adelaide Hills. They sort of circled Adelaide, and you could head up to those hills. With myself and with my friends, we headed to a place called Sturt Creek. Now, at Sturt Creek you could swim, you'd find swimming holes, you had rope swings, and also you could go looking for yabbies, which are sort of, they're like seafood, freshwater seafood, like crustaceans or a mini lobster. If you did find 1 or 2 and your friends brought some matches with them, which they usually did because we like lighting fires, we would cook these prawns or mini lobsters and you could eat. So there was fresh seafood, so you never went hungry. Also, the water was crystal clear. You could drink out of those. Today you might be able to, but they usually cemented in these days. Back then they weren't. It was a complete Huckleberry Finn lifestyle. It was great fun, and you never went hungry. Apart from fresh seafood, you had orchards around the Adelaide Hills: apricot, peach, nectarine, fig, almond. It was all organic by today's standards. We had a really good lifestyle. We never went hungry. But again, all we were told was during the holidays, be home before the street lights came on. Arrna, Jane and Grant and Jenny were exactly the same. So there's your 2 days. Now, Mrs. Beaumont relented, as I said, otherwise she was going to have the children around her feet. So they were going to get ready to go to the beach. They were going to go down there for roughly 2 to 3 hours and be back on the midday bus. People would be most probably asking, where's Jim Beaumont? Well, Jim Beaumont wasn't there that morning. He went to Snowtown, which is 200 kilometres north of Adelaide, to do sales calls for Lincock Linen Industry, where he was to visit pubs, hotels and factories with linen. What was this linen? Towels, bed sheets, pillowcases, and also beach towels, which Lincock were well known to make. So the last time he saw the Beaumont children, he took them to Colley Reserve the previous day. And as they walked across Colley Reserve, he would wave to his children, and there was Jane putting down her bag, putting down her towels. They turn around again, another wave, and that was the last time that Jim Beaumont ever saw his children. So we go back to what they were wearing that fateful day. Jane was wearing a pink one-piece swimsuit. She had light green shorts. She had tartan sandal shoes or canvas shoes with white soles. She had 3 drying towels, and she also had a light blue airline type bag, but there was no insignia on it. She also had a white, initial description of the purse was white, a white clip purse. Her mother, Nancy, gave her around 7 to 8 shillings. And this was the bus ride down and back for all of them, and to buy lunch for Nancy, Jane, Arrna and Grant at the iconic Wenzel's Bakery. She also had with her a copy of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, which she put inside her airline type bag. She had short cropped brown hair. In fact, the 3 children had short cropped brown hair, and I believe that was the aftermath of Mrs. Beaumont trying to be a hairdresser, much like my mum, except my mum gave us bowl haircuts. And if you look back in the 60s, you can see some of those haircuts, although Jane, Arrna and Grant's haircut was a little bit tad better than what my mum gave us. Sorry, Mum. What was Arrna wearing? She was wearing a one-piece red and white striped bather. She was wearing tan shorts, and she had tan canvas shoes, and she had an orange hairpin in her hair. And again, as I said, she had short cropped brown hair. What was Grant wearing? Well, he had green and white striped bathers, and he had light green shorts he was wearing. He did not have a t-shirt or some sort of top. He had red sandal shoes. Now the reason behind that is that she thought, well, he's only going down to Colley Reserve for a short time and the day won't have heated up. They will be under shade and they'll only be down there, as I said, for a few hours. Now, that was a done thing in the 1960s. You may say now it's irresponsible, but it was not in the 1960s. This is just what we did. Once they've got all their gear together, they walk out onto the footpath, turn around. Mrs. Beaumont gives them a kiss on the cheek and they wave goodbye. And then Grant says to Nancy, "Don't worry, Mummy, we'll be okay, we'll be back soon." That was the last time she ever heard words spoken by any of her children. There they walked down Harding Street, they turned left around onto a diagonal road, and that's where they caught the Worthley's bus. I think it was Adelaide's only bus line. Where did that originate from? 4 to 5 k's up the road from Seacombe Gardens. And yes, you're right, that is where the Mullins family lived at the time. 2.5 k bus ride, 10-minute, and they head to Mosley Street, the corner of Mosley Street and Jetty Road. They get off the bus and across the road, straight across the road, is the iconic Wenzel's Bakery, and that comes into play big time very shortly. As they get off the bus, they walk across Jetty Road and the tram tracks. Now, the tram still runs today. It runs from Glenelg into Adelaide. It's 12 kilometres. As they're walking across, Jane calls out, "Hey, it's the postman, Tom Patterson." Tom Patterson obviously recognises the children because he is the local Somerton Park and Brighton postman. He has seen these kids grow up. He saw Jane Beaumont as a baby to 9 years old, the same with Arrna and Grant. And he remembers this day. However, some of you are thinking right now, hold it, I read that Tom Patterson saw them in the afternoon. Now, that is true initially. When he was interviewed, he had a lot of things going on in his mind. Now remember that Tom Patterson was delivering post to them. They knew him by name, and all the children. He was part of the neighbourhood. And this really upset him no end. I was talking to Tom Patterson's son, and he said Dad was very distraught. And of course they wanted to know what had happened, and he was a little bit confused. However, when he got his thoughts together, a few days later he said, "No, I definitely saw the children in the morning, not the afternoon." Now, I was lucky enough to meet Tom Patterson in Glenelg about 10 years ago with Mostyn Matters, the last remaining detective alive that was at the station that day. When I spoke to Tom, he reiterated that he saw the children in the morning and not the afternoon. And I remembered him saying also, there is not a day that goes by that he doesn't think of those children's smiling faces.
The spot where Mr. Patterson last saw the 3 Beaumont children. He was riding his bicycle down Mosley Street, and he saw them standing right where I am. He stopped his bicycle just here. He said hello to them. Then he turned around the corner into Jetty Road and went down towards the post office.
So after Jane waves to the postie Tom Patterson, they cross Colley Reserve. It's only about 50 metres, and Jane, Arrna and Grant put their towels down with Jane's bag right at the shoreline and go in for a dip into the ocean. Now Glenelg, Somerton, Seacliff, Brighton, Henley Beach, all that ocean is dead flat. Why? Because it faces the Gulf of St Vincent. Beautiful beach for swimming, not for surfing. Now, according to Jenny, Jane's best friend, she'd been down with Colley Reserve with them many times, and she always remembered that Grant couldn't swim and he'd go up to his belly button, and Jane would warn him, "Don't go past your belly button or I'll get very angry at you." She was a mother figure to Grant and Arrna, and they looked up to her. They were down at the water's edge for quite some time. Once they'd finished, they only walked up about 20 metres, and Jane, Arrna and Grant placed their towels and that airline-type bag in a secluded corner of Colley Reserve, just behind the Holdfast Bay Sailing Club, and it was sort of secluded or hidden, not hidden, but it was all sort of, you had the sideshow, some of the stalls in front, so it was a little secluded corner you can see in this photo. Now Colley Reserve, unlike today, was in sections divided by cement paths, and those sections was all beautiful green lawn and the sprinklers were going, and that's where the children loved to play, running in and out the sprinklers, screaming, and also getting the salt water off them. I did that, my brothers and sisters did that, and that's exactly what Jane, Arrna and Grant Beaumont were doing that day. So they put them down, the towels and the bag, and they walk over or run over to play underneath the Colley Reserve sprinklers. At that time, this is according to an elderly couple sitting on a park bench close by, that right there was a man lying down, and he was looking at the children as they came up from the beach. He again looked at them while they placed their towels, and he was staring at them, as they said, as they went over to play underneath the sprinklers. Keep in mind this, that man was already there. Is it a coincidence that Jane, Arrna and Grant Beaumont placed their towels not too far away? We'll find out later. Now with this man, what did he look like? What was the description? Well, this is according to this elderly couple sitting on the park bench. Also, there was another eyewitness, a younger lady, and a man down from Broken Hill with his family. Broken Hill was in the west of New South Wales, it's a mining town, and he was down for the Adelaide cricket test between England and Australia starting on the Friday. So, what did he look like? Okay, this man, he was 6 foot to 6'1" tall. He was tanned and he was of athletic build. He had light brown brushed back hair, and some say it was parted to one side. And I know some of you are thinking already, hey, hold it, I heard that he had blonde hair. Initially, that was the description given by the elderly couple, and it reached the press without it being corroborated. By the time it got to the press, it was bleached blonde hair in need of cutting. And it wasn't. And then it morphed into a surfy type looking dude. It wasn't, and it wasn't corroborated, and this annoyed the detectives at the Glenelg police station no end, because they were still going through interviewing witnesses, and this took several days. They needed to corroborate. However, the press got ahead of themselves and it became bleached blonde hair. So of course people were looking for a surfy, some sort of dude. They were watching out for the dirty old man, something that did fit what they thought this individual would be like. They couldn't be further from the truth. So he had light brown hair, brushed back, and supposedly parted to one side. As the sketch here depicts, he had a large forehead, longish face, or as the press said, sharp features. He had light blue bathers with a white stripe going down either side. This is roughly the same colours as the Henley Beach Surf Lifesaving Club, only about 3 kilometres down the road. What did he have with him? Well, he was on his towel, and his shirt and trousers were on the park bench. What wasn't seen? Wallet, car keys and carry bag. This man was travelling very light. Age-wise, he was described as early 30s to early 40s, or the papers said middle age. In fact, some of the eyewitnesses said middle age. Some of the papers said late 30s, early 40s. Anyway, it wasn't a young fellow, it was somebody that was very mature, and obviously with the brushed back hair, liked to keep themselves in shape. He was watching the children come back, and for a while they were sorting themselves out, and then Arrna and Grant walk across to the man and they started laughing and talking as if they knew one another. And remember, that man was already there before the Beaumont children came. The eyewitnesses never saw this man in the water. He was never seen in the water, and remember that his hair was already brushed back and parted to one side. That really wouldn't indicate that he'd been in the water. So what was he doing there? So the children went over to him and they started playing with this man. Grant was jumping over him and Arrna was flicking him with his towel. Where was Jane? Well, she came over a few minutes later and again started conversing, and she also was flicking him with the towel. Now that looks like these 4 people knew one another. You just don't, oh, it looks like a nice man, I'll go over and flick him with a towel. And because they were conversing and laughing, it looks like they had met previously. If the man was already there and the children put their towels down afterwards, you would think that maybe they had met previously and this rendezvous was predetermined. Conjecture, of course. They were playing, and at some time the man came across to the couple that were sitting on the bench. The man from Broken Hill wasn't too far away, and neither was the younger lady. What they thought the man said, or what was reported, is, have you seen somebody messing with our clothes? We've had money pinched. The man from Broken Hill and the younger lady thought he said, have you seen anybody messing with our clothes? We've had money taken. Whichever way it was, the man is saying that the children and him have no money. And remember, at no time did he say, my wallet's been taken. Why? Because most probably there wasn't a wallet. He came to this reserve travelling very light. Now, the children and the man have no money. He turns around, he walks back to the children that were standing not too far behind him. He's obviously had a conversation with them, but they don't seem to be perturbed. Now, considering that Jane has her purse stolen, her purse taken, she has no money, she would have been worried, how do I get home? How do I have lunch for mum? I've got to walk home in this 40 degree or 42 degrees Celsius heat. Mum is going to be very angry. However, this man was the knight in shining armour. I can get you some money. So they're all comfortable, so they keep playing. Now, not too long after that, it was just after 12 o'clock, the man picks up his trousers and towel, and also the children get changed. But what is really strange is this man starts to help Arrna, Grant and Jane get dressed. Now, the people watching this thought this was very strange, that especially Jane was old enough to dress herself. And let's think about this. What were they dressing? They only had to pull their shorts up. Even Grant could do that, but yet he felt like he had to help. And Xanthi Mallet, arguably Australia's leading criminologist, said this has got the fingerprints of Harry all over it. He was already getting sexually aroused.
What sort of person are we talking about here?
It's all about power and control, and this is a very bold thing to do. You know, it's no small feat to take 3 children from a very public place. Somebody very confident, very charismatic, somebody who probably lacks empathy for the victims, because somebody who's going to predate on children is not going to be somebody who's going to worry about their feelings or what they need. So we're talking a pretty cold, calculating person here.
So after he helped dressing the children, which again, it really raises question marks or exclamation marks. There was no need for him to do so. And of course, Xanthi Mallet's pretty well right. This had the hallmarks of Harry Phipps's fingerprints all over it, because when he was around Saturn, he loved feeling the garment to a point that he got sexually aroused. This, to me, and to Bill Hayes and maybe other people that are listening, this seems like a setup. Why? Well, Mr. Beaumont had dropped them off at Colley Reserve the day previously, so they were there the day before, and Jenny, Jane's best friend, said they went down to Colley Reserve many times, so they were regulars. But then again, so was Harry Phipps, living 190 metres in direct sight of Colley Reserve, and he was an avid swimmer at Glenelg. Now, I just have to retrace here. Harry Phipps in 1966 was 48 years old. The man seen at the beach, and he did fit the description, but the man seen at the beach was early to late 30s to early 40s. Now you're saying, well, hold it, Harry Phipps is too old. Well, I spoke to senior managers who have retired from the cast alloy factory. These senior managers hadn't met one another or spoken to one another since they left cast alloy. What they said about Harry was he did keep himself fit, and he was a regular swimmer at Colley Reserve, and that he was 48 in 1966, but they both said, and there was 2 senior managers, that Harry Phipps looked much younger than his years in the 1960s, but aged very quickly from the early 1970s onwards, and that's why on age we cannot discount Harry Phipps. So what happens next? He changes the children. He doesn't change himself, by the way. He picks up his towel, his shirt, his trousers again, no carry bag, no wallet, no car keys were seen, and he starts walking in a northerly direction away from Wenzel's Bakery and their bus stop in the complete opposite direction. What do the children do? They follow him. He is the Pied Piper. What has this man promised Jane? He's promised he'd have to. He's promised them, I can get you some money. The eyewitnesses said they left Colley Reserve or got up and walked in a northerly direction around 12:05. They're approximates. They walked 90 metres up Colley Reserve in a northerly direction, across where the Rondavel is, you can see a cement path. They crossed that, and the eyewitness said they could see the children waiting for the man as he got changed in the change rooms, which was part of the Glenelg Surf Lifesaving Club. Now, why didn't he get changed at Colley Reserve, just where the children were? He only had his trousers to put on and his shirt. What was he doing in the change rooms? Well, what did he have of Jane's that Jane had lost or had been pinched? The purse. Now he's got two options. He doesn't have a carry bag. He can disguise it or hide it down his trouser pants, or he can discard it. But if he discards it, and this guy is very cunning, very intelligent, that's a piece of evidence. So he takes it with him. They wait for him for a few minutes when he gets changed. Now, eyewitnesses said the children and the man were not seen walking back along Colley Reserve. They either kept going northerly or they went across Colley Reserve up Augusta Street. One of the two. And who lives up Augusta Street? You guessed it, Harry Phipps. Jane Beaumont and the children were then seen at Wenzel's Bakery around 12:25, around 12:30. This is approximates. Now, the shop attendant knew Jane because she was a local. The shop attendant knew Jenny, Jane's best friend. They knew a lot of the kids. That was the 1960s. Everybody knew everybody. Jane was at the Wenzel's Bakery and she was buying lunch with a £1 note. And it was a £1 note that Mrs. Beaumont certainly did not give her. Where did she get that £1 note from? Now, detectives in 1966 and ever since have said, who was so wealthy to part with a £1 note that to a child they supposedly hardly knew? A £1 note was a wow factor. And remember, when we were talking about the dig at the factory and those two boys, David and Robin, they were teenagers and they even said it was a wow factor. So this was a pivotal piece of information in 1966 and it had been ever since. What was Jane buying? She was buying 1 pie, 5 pasties, 6 finger buns and 2 large bottles of fizzy drink. Well, that's a lunch for 6. Who are they? Well, of course it's the man, Jane, Arrna, Grant, Nancy. Who's the 6th for? Now, if this man has given her a £1 note, he's a betting man. And if it's Harry Phipps and they've gone to his place, and this is conjecture right now, he's betting a £1 note that she will return. If she doesn't return, and remember Jane is very honest and very reliable according to Jenny, what has he lost? He's wealthy, he's lost a £1 note, big deal, but if they come back, it's a win situation for him, unfortunately, but that's the way the pedophile, the predator thinks. So from Wenzel's Bakery, the children were never seen again, as if they'd vanished off the face of the earth. Or were they? Was that the last time? Now, think about Wenzel's Bakery. What doesn't Jane have, or it wasn't reported? She doesn't have a carry bag and she doesn't have her drying towels. Where are they? And as they leave, as I said, it was like they'd vanished off the face of the earth. And I repeat, they were supposedly never seen again. But we find out after we analyse Hayden Phipps's interview, he in fact says he saw them in the backyard. And when did he see them in the backyard? Around lunchtime. Lucky guess, Hayden.
I think they were inside the house, and that's it.
Did you hear what they're saying?
No, it was too far away.
Hayden's decision to speak came at the urging of his second wife, Angela.
Now think of Mrs. Beaumont, Nancy Beaumont. She goes down to the bus where the bus is going to stop at 12 noon. The children don't get off. She's a little bit worried, but she's thinking, well, the children could have been having such a good time. They might even be walking home. She hopes not. They will be on the next bus, which according to Nancy and the newspapers was 2 hours later. Now that's a worry. She was thinking that the children would be home very shortly. Maybe they'd walked. She comes home. A friend, a neighbour of theirs, comes over and they're having a cup of tea. She's keeping her eye on the clock, as all parents would. 12:30, 1 o'clock, 1:30, no sign of the children. She is worried. She goes back down to the bus stop. 2 o'clock, the children do not get off the bus. That is devastating. And parents, if I can equate that feeling with, if you get a 2 a.m. call, how do you feel as a parent? Nobody calls at 2 a.m. with good news. That's how Mrs. Beaumont and Mr. Beaumont felt for the next 50 years. So at 2 o'clock, they're not there. She is now worried. She goes back home. Another friend pops in. They said, Nancy, don't worry, nothing is untoward. And sure enough, you can't blame them for saying that, because this is the 1960s. It's a period of safety. Or was it?
Nancy Beaumont thought her 3 children would be home by 1 o'clock. Increasingly panicked, she waited as bus after bus returned from the beach without them. By mid-afternoon, she was joined by her husband.
He was a travelling salesman, and he thought he'd give the children a surprise and get back early. So he got back only to be met by his wife Nancy, who stated that the children hadn't returned home from the beach.
2:30 comes, 3 o'clock, or just before 3. Who should drive in the driveway? Jim Beaumont. Thank God. She goes out and greets Jim Beaumont. She is now distraught. Jim Beaumont's reaction was very stoic, but underneath, he was worried. It was 3 hours and the children hadn't returned home. So straight in the car, he goes down the side streets heading towards Glenelg and Colley Reserve, seeing if he can see the children walking back. He can't. He finally finds a car spot, and according to Mr. Beaumont, Colley Reserve was jam-packed full of people. Young kids, but also the adults had started to head towards Colley Reserve. Like my mother and father used to do that. We used to head to Colley Reserve around 4 or 5 to get out of the summer heat. And it was wonderful being down at Colley Reserve at that time. It was absolutely magical, because as the sun set across the ocean, you could see, or you'd watch the lights come on, orange, greens, purples. It was just absolutely magical. Jim couldn't see his children. There was just way too many people. So he drives back another way to see if he could spot his children. He could not. He picks up Mrs. Beaumont. She is now very distraught, very worried. 4 hours, they're still not home. They get in the car, they drive around the suburbs, having a look for the children, Jane, Arrna and Grant. 4:30, by close to 5 o'clock, they present themselves at the Glenelg police station, which is on Jetty Road near Colley Reserve. In fact, it backs onto Colley Reserve. Now it's the post office, now the Glenelg post office, but back then, that's where the Glenelg police station was. When they first came in, a constable came out to greet them. He could see that Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont were both very worried, and that's where Mostyn Matters comes into play. He is the last remaining detective alive that was at the station that day, as I've mentioned a few times, but maybe worth mentioning again. I know Mostyn very well. When I first met him, he said he was really annoyed with himself, that initially when he met Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont, he thought, the children are just sort of, being waylaid, they're at another friend's place, because this hadn't happened, not just in South Australia, but around Australia or the world. The abduction of 3 children would never enter anybody's mind. So what does he do? He gets a constable to drive to their place, to have a look around, to search the home, that the children weren't hiding somewhere. He did a door knock on some of the neighbours. Nobody had seen these children. It was now 5:15, 5:30. He radios in to Mostyn. He calls in his boss, and it's all hands on desk. The boss calls CIB in Adelaide, and the alert goes out. These children are definitely missing.
Well, I think Mr. Beaumont reported them missing at about 5 or 6 o'clock. It was at least 6 hours before and their disappearance was broadcast over the radio and over the TV.
Now, they sent some of the patrol cars out around the streets, and they had these speakers on the top of their car. I mean, by today's standards, that's really archaic. But I was saying, has anybody seen these children? It reached the radio, so news bulletins went out across the radio, and at the 6 o'clock news, there they were. The children have vanished. Has anybody seen these children? Now, Jane's best friend at that time, She remembers her auntie, and she was staying at her auntie's place for Christmas in the countryside, and she called her in and say, "Isn't that your friend?" And there it was, Jane, Arrna and Grant have disappeared. She remembers that day very well, as much as she remembers the first man landing on the moon. She remembers when John Lennon got shot. She remembers when Elvis Presley died. And this event is sketched in her memory also. All she thought was, where in the heck are you, Jane? What's happened? Get a message to us. Because she said Jane was a highly intelligent individual.
It's one of those moments, you remember where you were when you were told that she had disappeared.
So Mostyn Matters took a report. He talked to his boss. The word went out and patrol cars were everywhere. Also, Jim Beaumont, before he worked for Lincott Linen Industries, was a taxi driver and he owned a few taxis. The word got out to the taxi drivers that were the Adelaide Cab Company, and they got wind of it and they started searching around the suburbs of Glenelg and surrounding suburbs. But again, no trace at that time was ever found of the children. Mr. Beaumont got back into a patrol car with an officer and they scurried around the suburbs again of Glenelg. What else could they do? Mrs. Beaumont was taken home and she was very distraught. She had her family and friends with her. They had knew what was happening because the word had got out. However, by about 7 o'clock, Nancy Beaumont was so distraught, she needed to be sedated by the family doctor. She was continually sobbing, the poor lady. She was beside herself. So the family doctor was called. Mr. Beaumont continued with this constable driving around the suburbs of Glenelg. The constable also needed to go home around 11 o'clock because he had a family of his own. Mr. Beaumont got back in his car and he drove around until the early morning. And what gets me with this case, if you think about it, there's Nancy Beaumont in the morning waving to her children goodbye, and little Grant Beaumont saying, "Don't worry, Mummy, we'll be home soon." And yet, around 8 hours later, poor Nancy Beaumont needed to be sedated. Her children were not home. How devastating is that? So that's what happened the fateful day, January 26, 1966. It is truly heartbreaking for not only Jim and Nancy Beaumont, but the rest of Australia. Feel for them. So part B is our next. We'll get on to what happened the days, weeks, months and years that preceded. And as I said, people have asked me and Bill Hayes, whatever happened to Nancy and Jim Beaumont? Well, we can fill you a bit in on that, but we can tell you they did get divorced a few years later. The pressure of losing 3 children split them apart. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed what you hear. If you like it, give it the thumbs up and do make a comment. Do click the links below or go to the website, or you can go to the website, thebeaumontchildren.com.au. So until next time, I'm Stuart Mullins. I really appreciated your company.